this video, I'm going to show you how to access and use the churchofjesuschrist.org church calendar. And I'm going to show you two methods for accessing it. First, we'll look at the calendar as it's meant to be seen, which is online on the church website, churchofjesuschrist.org. Second, we'll look at it on a mobile device. In both cases, you'll learn how to see the events that are coming up in your ward or stake, and also on the general church level. So here I am on churchofjesuschrist.org, and in order to fully see and use the calendar, I'm going to need to go here to sign in. So I'll click sign in. At this point, if you don't have an account with churchofjesuschrist.org, you'll need to click sign up, and typically you would need to put in your name, your member number, and some other information. If you have trouble with any of that, you can talk to your ward clerk, and with the help of your clerk, you can definitely get that information so that you can sign up for an account. If you do have an account, just go ahead and put in your username, click next, put in your password, click verify. At that point, you're taken to a welcome screen with some information and some tools, and you can browse through those. Somewhere on this list of links or tools, you're going to find the calendar. But there's another way to get to it. You can just go here to Tools and choose Calendar. Typically, that's the fastest, most direct way to get to the calendar. At this point, it's going to load up the church calendar. Now, you may get pop-ups like this one. You can learn more or close out of them. But what you see here is the church calendar as it is meant to be seen. Using this calendar, you can look at events on specific days. You can see what's coming up later in the month. You can switch months by clicking this arrow here. So I can go from June to July simply by clicking that button. You can also go back in time. So I'm going to go back to May to check events just to know what day something happened. And there's a shortcut. Instead of clicking this button several times to get to December of 2023, I can just click here on this arrow and select December from the drop-down list. And that will help me jump directly to December, saving me several clicks. I'm going to click this Today button to jump back to June 2023 because I want you to see that there's also a week view option. So right now, by default, I'm seeing the entire month all at once. But if I click on week, it changes the view and I can see the current week in detail. Whole day events show up here toward the top. And then below that, you'll find events with specific start and end times. I'm going to switch back now to the month view. So now that you know how to navigate the calendar to move forward or back or jump to a specific month or year, you can switch from month view to week view. Let's talk about the nature of this church calendar that we're looking at. What you see here in front of you is called the church calendar. You can see that here in the upper left. I am not looking at the stake calendar necessarily, or the ward calendar, or the young men's calendar, or whatever you might be specifically interested in. This is the church calendar. And guess who gets to decide what you see on the church calendar? Well, actually you do. You get to decide what types of events and events from which sources you see on your calendar. Let's look at how you make those decisions. So here at the left, there's a panel that's opened up. And if you don't see that panel, you may need to click this button here. This little arrow expands the panel or collapses it. I'm going to expand it. And this is one of the places where you can make decisions about what events and what calendars you see on the church calendar. Again, this interface that we're looking at here is the church calendar, but within that interface, there are multiple possible calendars that you could see or hide, depending on your preferences. So let's look at the calendars that this particular person has enabled. Here you'll see a check mark in a box just to the left of stake calendars. Because that's checked, all of the stake calendars are visible for this user. Now, I clicked that check mark and that then hid all of the stake calendars for this user. So that's something to be aware of. Just because you don't see an event on the calendar does not mean that there's no event coming up. There very well may be an event on June 28th, for example. It just could be that you've hidden it and therefore you can't see it. So let's talk about stake calendars. As of right now, in my stake, there are several stake calendars. Now, from what I understand, the church recommends that church leaders limit the number of calendars. And so it's very likely that in the near future, the number of stake calendars in our stake will be reduced. But for right now, there are 6 stake calendars. You can see that there's one for scheduling one of the buildings, another for scheduling another building. And the reason that these calendars exist is because years ago, stake leaders chose to create calendars that 2 or more wards could share, and they could take turns scheduling the building for each other. My understanding is that the church now recommends that instead of creating calendars like this, named after a building, that church leaders instead use these locations that were set up by the church itself. And so, like I said, in the near future, these stake calendars here are likely to disappear. So most likely, going forward, you'll want to check this box here in order to see stake calendar events, if you want to see them. Now let's browse down the list of calendars, and let's take a look at the ward calendar options. Again, as I understand it, the church recommends creating and using as few of calendars as possible. But 10 or even 20 or 25 years ago, ward leaders created several calendars, and those have remained in the system. So again, it's likely that ward leaders may choose to delete some of these ward calendars in the near future. But if they don't, you as a ward member need to consider, what events do you want to look at? If you're not a young woman, do you need to see the young women events? Now, in many cases, these individual calendars, the young women calendar or the young single adults calendar, don't have any events associated with them. Just because these individual calendars were created 20 years ago doesn't mean that any ward leaders are using them today, but they still show up in the list of your ward calendars that you have the option to see or hide. So my recommendation would be to start by showing just the calendar that looks like the most official ward calendar. So I'm unchecking all of these different organizations' calendars, and I'm showing just the ward activities calendar. That seems to be the most official calendar that I see here that's for the ward in general, the entire ward. Now, if you have a Relief Society calendar or an Elders Quorum calendar, Young Men's, etc., and if you're aware that those organizations are using those individual calendars, feel free to check them, and those specific calendar events will show up on the church calendar. In addition to these ward calendars and the stake calendars, we also have locations. These locations were created not by your ward or your stake. These represent each property owned by the church in your stake. And the reason you can see these in this panel here at the left is to help you to think not about the ward events that might be coming up or the stake events, but just the building. What if you need to schedule the building for a wedding reception or a family reunion or whatever it might be that's approved by your ward and stake leaders? And let's say that event will happen on July 1st. Checking the stake calendar may not be good enough to assure that your ward building or stake building is available on that day. Checking the ward calendar also won't be sufficient, because not only might there be an event scheduled by your ward or by the stake on July 1st, but it's possible that a different ward that you may not even have access to their calendar has scheduled July 1st for an event. It is possible for one ward in the stake to schedule another building in the stake that they're not assigned to meet in. And so if you don't want to think necessarily about ward or stake events, but you want to focus on the physical location itself and the date, that's when these location calendars come in very handy. So I'm going to turn on this first location calendar and notice that some events appeared. Now I'm going to turn on this next building calendar and let's see if other events appear. Okay, several more events appeared. And again, we can proceed to add more and more location calendars to the church calendar. And you can see that the church calendar is getting more and more busy. There's more and more events showing up. Now, because I enabled these location calendars, I'm seeing every scheduled event that's attached to one of the 4 buildings in our stake. And I can see that there is an event on July 1st. Now at this point, I want to address something that you've probably noticed as I've been showing this calendar, and that is some of these start times don't seem right. A 1 a.m. young men's activity, a stake bishops' council meeting at 2 a.m., some of these times seem unreasonable. So let's look at a possible reason for this. When using the church calendar, not only are you responsible for which individual calendars, ward, or stake, and locations appear on your church calendar, but you're also responsible for the time zone that you want to experience the calendar in. So if you click here in the upper right on this gear symbol, you can choose date options and make sure that the time zone is selected properly. So I'm going to move down here and choose the time zone that is closest to where I live. Now when I click back to the calendar, notice that the event times and actual days even show up properly. So before I switched that, this young men's activity looked like it happens on Thursday, when in reality it happens on Wednesday at 7. But because the time zone was wrong, it shifted everything. So again, you are responsible for deciding which calendars show up on your church calendar interface, and you're also responsible for the time zone that your church calendar shows, and you can make that change here in the gear symbol. Something that's important to know whenever you're looking at an event in the church calendar, whether it be online on the church website or through the app, is that you can click or tap on any of these events to see if there is additional information about the event. So I clicked on this event and it shows what room the event will be in, the address of the event, who made the last modification of the event, and the day and time that they made that modification. Sometimes there are also notes about who's invited, any logistical information, or things like that. So don't hesitate to click on or tap on any of these events to learn more information. Okay, so I know that's a lot, but to summarize, what you see here in front of you when you go to your church calendar is the church calendar interface. It's not necessarily the state calendar. It's only going to show the state calendar if you tell it to. And it's not necessarily the ward calendar either, unless you make sure that that's checked. If you want to see every event tied to one of the buildings in your stake, you need to make sure that these building locations are selected. In many cases, though, it's too cluttered. It's too difficult to see what you really want to see if you have all of these turned on. So you may want to just turn on the location for the ward that you attend, and then make sure that the stake calendar is selected and the ward calendar. Those are my recommendations. Now, with a recent update to the church calendar system, it's now possible to change which calendars even show up for you here at the left in this panel. So if you want to remove any of these calendars so they don't confuse you or clutter up your panel of calendars here at the left, what you could do is go here to this gear symbol in the upper right corner and choose this option, choose calendars. When you get there, you could choose to allow email reminders for calendar events. Now, I wouldn't rely on this necessarily, especially for right now, but if you check that, if a calendar event is set up to have reminders, and if it's all working properly, you should get some email reminders of events. You can also enable church-wide events so that you can see when events like the First Presidency Christmas Devotional or General Conference are coming up. And again, you can choose to have reminders or not. But take a look at this. I could remove, for example, the Young Women calendar from my panel at the left just by unchecking the Young Women calendar. So I'm going to click back on calendar, and let's see if Young Women shows up in my list of calendars here. It does not. It's missing now, and it's because I chose to remove it. So now that we've looked at and you've learned how to use the church calendar as it was originally intended to be experienced, let's look at the method that many members of the church use to look at the calendar. Many members of the church never go to their churchofjesuschrist.org account, and they don't look at the church calendar here online. Instead, many members of the church look at the calendar on their smartphone. So here I am on an iPhone, and the experience will be slightly different perhaps on another phone, but all I did to get this app was I did a search in the App Store for my phone. I just searched for Member Tools, and then I installed it. Because I've installed it, it now says open there, and this is what the app looks like, and I can just tap on it to open it up. You can see there are some other tools across the bottom of the screen, but if you just go here to the lower right where it says More, you should be able to see Calendar, and by tapping on it, it'll load up any events that you have opted in to see. As you can probably see right away, the experience is very different on a smartphone as compared to on a desktop or laptop computer. Now, having said that, you could certainly go to your web browser on a smartphone or a tablet, and you could go to churchofjesuschrist.org and log in the browser. If you do that, the experience will be a little bit more like it is here on the desktop. But if you're using the app, this is basically what you're going to see: a list of events with some basic information. Let's look at a couple of important things for you to know. Here in the upper right, if you tap on Edit, this is where you can make some choices as to which calendars to show and which calendars to hide. Up here at the top, you can list either all calendars, or you can pick the stake calendars and then check or uncheck the ones that you want to see, or you could pick a specific ward list of calendars and then check or uncheck the ones that you want to see or hide. I'm going to tap Done. Back in the calendar, you should be able to then tap on any particular calendar to open it up to see if there are notes or details about that event listed. I'm going to tap this button to go back to the list of calendar events. And there's one other very important thing I need to show you about the calendar as it's experienced on a smartphone. Here in the lower right corner, if you tap on the More button, you can go into your settings, and there's an option here for calendar months. By default, you will only be able to see 3 calendar months at a time. And this can make it very hard to plan ahead for events that you want to schedule or that you want to plan for. So I'm going to tap there on calendar months 3, and now I can change it to 12 months. Now I can tap this back arrow, go back into the calendar, and now I should be able to see up to 12 months of calendar events. Again, just like using the calendar on a desktop or laptop computer, on your smartphone, you will only see the ward activities and the stake activities and other activities that you have chosen to show on your church calendar. One of the major drawbacks to using the Member Tools app to check the church calendar is that the calendar will not update unless you update the app. So whenever a stake leader or a ward leader decides to change the start time of an event or the day that that event will be on, or anytime an event is canceled, if you look in the Member Tools app and check the calendar to see when and what day that event will be, you're looking at incorrect information. If that event has been edited and changed by the leadership, you may be looking at the wrong information. And so that's one reason I say the church calendar was really meant to be experienced on the church's website. The app is very handy, but if you're thinking you may be getting incorrect information, then you should definitely resync your Member Tools app to get the latest calendar information. So I hope that looking at the church calendar online and also looking at the mobile version of the church calendar has been helpful to you and will help you understand how to get the most out of the church calendar. Please note that as I talk about this, I do not speak for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm just sharing my own experience in using the church calendar. And of course, at any time, the church may change how the calendar works, and also it may change the advice and counsel that it gives to church leaders on how to use the church calendar. If you found this video to be helpful, please consider sharing it with other members of the ward or the stake so that we can spread the word on how to access and use the church calendar.